Okay, here's the article over at the Carolina Journal Online about these new FDA regulations. This is the Family Tobacco Prevention and Control Act of 2009. And what it suggests is that health warnings would have to be put on the packages. No free samples could be issued for retailers and consumers to test before buying large quantities. And so a number of these cigar guys are pretty upset about this. In fact, there's legislation has been introduced into both the House and Senate to exempt hand-rolled premium cigars. I don't get it. Maybe I'm missing something here, but if you're selling a product that kills people or that sickens people when used as directed, and to the best of my knowledge, death is a secondary side effect of pretty much everything else in our society. In other words, people say, well, too much water will kill you. Yes, if you buy a garden hose, you put it in your mouth and you put it on full blast and you fill up your stomach until it bursts, that garden hose, you could argue, killed you. But that's not when used as directed. So, well, cars kill people. Well, not when used as directed. Yes, a lot of people die. 50,000 people die a year from car crashes, more or less. And in fact, actually, I think it's down quite a bit now since I first memorized that statistic probably 2 decades ago. It's 30, 35,000 now because cars are safer. But still, people die from car crashes, but not when used as directed. Or sometimes, but it's somebody else isn't using it as directed. Somebody, changes lanes and runs into you and you were driving just fine, but now you're dead. But it doesn't matter. There's somebody screwed up. But tobacco is the only product in America, in the United States, in the world, to the best of my knowledge. Correct me if I'm wrong. I suppose you could argue that, well, even toxic, even radioactive waste from nuclear power plants and things, if it's stored safely, arguably isn't killing people. The question is whether safe storage is an oxymoron when it comes to nuclear products. But tobacco causes death when used as directed, causes sickness when used as directed. And this is where I understand and don't disagree with the argument that edibles should not be pot edibles should not be in a form that is going to cause a 6-year-old to go, "Oh, mine!" Right? The idea of gummy bears and things. I don't think it's a good idea. I think pot is a recreational drug for adults. It should be packaged and manufactured in ways that appeal to adults. And we had this thing about cigarettes and candy cigarettes some time ago, and I think they're still making candy cigarettes, and I'm opposed to that. But candy cigarettes don't contain nicotine. Gummy bears that have pot. But here's the difference. When you use pot as directed, it doesn't kill you and it doesn't cause disease. In fact, there's a growing body of evidence that indicates when you use pot as directed, it prevents disease. It lowers blood pressure. It heals psychological trauma. It reduces, it blocks the growth in a half a dozen different sectors, dozen different chemical pathways that we've talked about in this program before. Actually, literally blocks the growth of cancer cells and encourages the suicide of cells that have become cancerous. And pot is an incredibly effective painkiller for people who are experiencing chronic pain. So when used as directed, marijuana does not cause death or disease. Tobacco does. There's just no way around that. I'm strongly of the opinion that tobacco, if you're going to look at drugs that should be banned, put tobacco at the top of that list. It's 5 times more addictive than heroin, and heroin doesn't kill you when used as directed. In fact, when England, back 20 years ago, when the UK decriminalized heroin and said, anybody can get heroin, all you need is a doctor's prescription, and we will give those out freely. All you have to have is a history of heroin addiction. Instead of treating heroin addiction with methadone, which, by the way, and having known a bunch of heroin addicts back when I was in my teenage years, and one of my best friends died of an overdose of heroin. I was right in the middle of this stuff when this was happening in the late 60s and early 70s. I can tell you that methadone is harder to kick than heroin. I've seen probably a dozen people kick heroin. And it takes 3 or 4 days, and the symptoms are like you got a bad cold. The flu, it's not even as bad as the flu. Methadone takes weeks, in some cases months, to kick. And the depression associated with that withdrawal is mind-boggling. And one of my best friends committed suicide while withdrawing from methadone. Methadone is a synthetic narcotic. It was manufactured by the Nazis. Adolf Hitler was addicted to it. It's nasty stuff. So the UK said, we're going to give heroin to heroin addicts. And what happened was the rate of overdose collapsed, went radically down. This petty crime in London dropped, I think it was 30%, because, the heroin was free, or essentially free. It was very cheap. People no longer had to rob somebody to pay for their fix. And I don't know if you ever saw this. 60 Minutes did a brilliant special on this like 15 years ago, where they followed a bunch of heroin addicts in the UK. One was a secretary, one was a stockbroker, one was a healthcare professional. I don't remember if he was a doctor or a nurse. And they followed their lives. And they would just, other than 2 or 3 times a day stopping what they're doing to go in the bathroom and shoot up, they were perfectly normal people. And what they found is that when people had prescription heroin over time, over a period of a couple of years, they just spontaneously quit, which is the thing that I observed when I was, when I knew heroin addicts back in the 60s and 70s. It's a lot harder to kick methadone, and it's even harder. It's 5 times harder to kick nicotine. So if we're going to ban a drug, or if we're going to make a drug more expensive, or if we're going to make it harder for a manufacturer to manufacture a drug, let's put nicotine, or not nicotine specifically, tobacco. Because apparently when you smoke these vaporizer pens or whatever, that just nicotine, unless they're filled with chemicals to make it taste good, is nowhere near as deadly as cigarettes, which have freebase nicotine in them. They add ammonia to these things to alkalize the nicotine so it hits you faster. It's nuts.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 866-987-THOM.
Presumably with a hand-rolled cigar, you're not getting that ammonia-treated, free-based nicotine, so it's a little less toxic. But still, it's tobacco.